That's funny. The Hoffman Show on Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Free Odyssey app. Who do I work for? Odyssey. What a start on a Friday, where we will talk to Ava Wallace in an hour about the Wizards' new hires, and we will talk about some of what they said right now. Well, I guess this first bite that I want to talk about today, it really, like, after the show yesterday, you know, obviously a long day. We were out at District E for the whole thing. We were on set with Russell, do the show, talk about it all, listen back to the interviews that take place, while we're playing them back. And as a result, like, you're kind of thinking about everything that was said. And there's a couple of clips, a couple of things that were said that really stuck with me. And ironically, the two that I want to talk about, the two that I think stick with me the most, are one thing that's said by Ted Leonsis that we're going to talk about in 10 minutes, and one that was said by Wes Unseld. For all of the really encouraging things and interesting answers and things we learned about Michael Winger and Will Dawkins, it's actually the incumbents that I think said the most interesting basketball-related things. And it's probably because, like, I have full faith in the guys that were hired based off their track records, based off talking to them, that they're going to figure stuff out. And also, they didn't offer a lot of specifics on anything because they just got here. But Unseld, as the coach, had certain basketball-adjacent thoughts that I thought were worth, parsing out. And when we talk about whether or not Ted Leonsis is going to give the full authority for a breakdown or a tear down or whatever direction these guys want to go, I thought Ted said something really fascinating that will play for you in 10 minutes. But the bite from Unseld was when I asked, he mentioned this phrase a couple times, but the first and most notable is when I asked him about Bradley Beal. Because it's not Wes's call, nor is he going to say, like, yeah, we need to move on from Bradley. He's not going to say that. And the big question for me is kind of the same question that I'm sure Michael Winger and Will Dawkins will have for Wes, which is, if we're going to be a championship caliber team, what's Bradley's role in that? How do we use him? What is it that we have not been doing right with him that we all agree he's a superstar and is an excellent NBA basketball player, but you won 35 games last year? How do we fix that? And so that's essentially what I asked Unseld, and here is what he said yesterday.
Well, obviously we want to make sure we can put out the most talent. And, those three guys you spoke of,
That phrase, modernizing our style, is fascinating to me as an avid NBA fan and observer. And specific to the threes, obviously, what does that actually look like? And can Bradley Beal do it? I think there's two ways in which Bradley needs to change his game for the better to get those threes. These are not things that I don't think he's aware of. It's certainly things that I would hope he and Drew Hanlon, his personal skills trainer, who's as good as it gets, are working on this offseason. But traditionally, and kind of when Bradley came into the NBA, this was still true. So much of pick and roll basketball was, kind of vertical, right? So you take, let's say you're going center pick and roll, so you're on the middle of the floor. The screen gets set on your defender as the ball handler, as Bradley, right at the three-point line. What do? You go hard off that screen. You try to get vertical to the rim. If you see that the defender has dropped well enough or is playing in drop coverage, you take a pull-up jump shot, and you get that nice, efficient two-point bucket, and Bradley Beal has made a lot of those in his career. He's excellent at it, and he should take those with regularity. However, what do we see now? We see a more horizontal pick and roll, or the pick and roll starting higher up the floor, where when you come off that screen, now you're taking a three. You either get separation horizontally and you kind of sidestep instead of taking your one dribble pull up. It's a side dribble pull up, and that's now a three instead of a long two. Or you kind of snake the screen, come back, and instead of when you snake the screen, so basically let's say again the pick's being set so that when you use it you're going left, you then cross back over right, and as your defender kind of chases you around, and you have space in front of that second defender, the big defender. Now you see guys like Harden is so good at this, snake all the way back around behind where they started with a step back three. Like, that's the kind of stuff that can get you more threes. The other way in which Bradley has gotten a lot of them off in his career is playing off the ball more. And that's something that I just think that he needs to do. You obviously want the ball in his hands, but can he play more, not all the time, because he is a solid ball handler, but can he play more like a J.J. Redick used to play, or a Ray Allen used to play, or these guys that worked off the ball, off screens, and maybe you modernize it with a dribble handoff type of game. And so instead of pick and roll, it's dribble handoff, but you need a big to play off of with that. A big who's an excellent passer and can read screens or read the defenders and get a lot of or set quality screens, make a lot of decisions, and not just see that two-man game, but see the entire floor in case someone's sleeping on the backside, all that kind of stuff. So there's also obviously different ways you can generate threes. Golden State uses a lot of split action. You need another great shooter to play off of. So can they use Beal and Kispert more to put defenses in conflict in the same way that, Miami does it with Duncan Robinson and Gabe Vincent at times? They're running plays in the fourth quarter of the NBA Finals for those two because the threat of them shooting is so great. But they've got to have the personnel as well to do that. You need more shooters. Monte Morris and Bradley Beal doing that is not going to get Bradley Beal open looks because no one's scrambling to cover Monte Morris. You also need, obviously Miami does it with Bam Adebayo handling the ball. Well, you need a big who can make those decisions. And for as skilled as Porzingis is, that's not his cup of tea. It's not Kuz's cup of tea either. So do you have the big that can kind of be the partner for Brad and anybody else who wants to do that? Draymond plays that role in Golden State. If Brad winds up getting traded to Philly, he will fit in masterfully with Joel Embiid because Joel is that guy. Screener. I mean, when JJ was there in Philadelphia, that was one of Redick's, if not his single highest scoring season. It's one of them because he was able to play the dribble handoff game so well. Not that he was a primary ball handler, but Joel becomes the primary ball handler, and the shooting threat of a guy like Redick was enough to generate an entire offense around. And so with Brad, who is far more skilled in terms of his off-the-dribble creation and the types of things he can do, better as a playmaker than some of the other guys that I mentioned, especially a guy like, let's say, JJ, and you're also asking him to score 10 points more per game, can you create those opportunities? Can you modernize in that way? And I think there's a lot of modernization of the organization in general that needs to happen, training, medical, all those kinds of things, data analysis. They're still working on fleshing out that department. They've certainly made strides, but I think that Michael Winger will bring in a whole new perspective. And that's also going to involve resources that I don't think have put forth that yet because I don't think they were asked for. I think Ted, especially someone with Ted's background, is going to be all gung-ho about technology and integrating it into the club. But he's got to know what to buy. And Michael Winger comes from L.A. under Ballmer, and they bought everything because that's what Steve Ballmer wanted. And so, long winding story short, they need to rethink how they play basketball. That involves who is playing. It involves how they use the pieces that they have. And for the head coach to be saying that, I do find kind of fascinating because he was the head coach last year. So my question, and ultimately the question going forward, is why, if Wes knows this, didn't it happen sooner? Was it organizational obstacles, other people pushing in opposite directions? They weren't all pulling on the same rope. The front office wanted to do one thing, and Wes had to listen because those were his bosses. Now he's got new bosses, and he'll be able to do something else. That's possible. Were the players tuning Wes out? If they are, we're going to find out who's got more power, the coach or the players. What's more important? And depending on the player, it's probably going to change the answer. But also from a cultural standpoint, if you got players who are just willing to flat out ignore the coach, maybe Michael Winger and Will Dawkins go, that ain't going to work. Not here. See ya. So there's a lot of questions that remain answered as to why. But I appreciate that Wes Unseld has articulated very clearly the what that we need to see moving forward, specific to Beal if he's here and they want to win more games. But I think also in general, that is a larger statement about the identity they're trying to build, who they want to be, and how they want to play basketball. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. When we get back, will Ted Leonsis let Michael Winger and Will Dawkins tear it down or do something else, whatever it is that they deem the best path forward for this team? Grant and Danny asked Leonsis that yesterday. His answer was very, very interesting. You'll hear it next. Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. You can also watch us streaming live on YouTube, youtube.com/@theteam980. I know yesterday we had some issues with the sound on YouTube. That was my fault, so I apologize for that. YouTube audience who listens in the 4 o'clock hour, you can hear me today. Hey! Also, just Anthony, real quick, say hi to the internet. Yeah, just saying hello. All right, back to me. All right, and back to Ted Leonsis. So the Wizards owner sat down with Grant and Danny yesterday at District E, and they did a great job with the interview. Fully endorsed going and checking out the podcast for those guys or on their feed, listening to the full interview. But it is a trepidatious topic for Wizards fans to think about whether or not Ted Leonsis will actually let Michael Winger and Will Dawkins tear this thing down if they ultimately decide that's what they want to do. If they come in and they're like, hey, we gotta start over, will Ted let them? Or will he put his foot down and be like, no, I want my franchise player. My franchise player is Bradley Beal. You are not allowed to touch him. Do not think about trading him. And the unequivocal answer that Michael Winger gave at the podium yesterday was, yes, I have the power to do that. And he did it sitting a foot and a half from Ted Leonsis, who did not object whatsoever. And what I thought was interesting in his interview with Grant and Danny, when Grant straight up asked him, like, will you have the power or will you give these guys the green light, is Leonsis did not only say yes, but kind of expanded on it based off history. Here's Leonsis.
Just look at my track record as an owner. I mean, what did we do with the Caps? We traded all of our players and went young and did the right things.
Era started.
What did we do with the Wizards when I first came here? We traded 3 all-star players, got the first-round pick in the draft, and rebuilt. You know, we've made the playoffs 5 of the last 10 years. Injuries has played, pretty serious role in there, but I'm not afraid of a rebuild. At the same time, what I told them is it's a blank canvas for you. This is our organization. These are our players. These are the contracts. Come on in, assess, review, come to me with the plan, and you're accountable. You're responsible. And I'm up for whatever you tell me this is what's going to get us to that right place. And they're totally empowered, and that's what's excited them about coming. No one wants to come and be the number one person for a team thinking that you're not going to be making the ultimate call. And so Michael has my assurance, all my partners' insurance that here's the keys, get us there.
I don't know how you're much more clear than that. I know that's not in many ways the answer that some fans want, in that he doesn't say there's a mandate to blow it up. That's what some people, and I want to take calls next for sure on what the plan should be, 301-230-0980. But some people say that's not enough. I want a mandate to tear it down. But that's not where Ted's at. And there was another part of the interview that I thought was really interesting and I think eye-opening, and I'll just summarize it because basically he said, we've been successful in all of these other places. And he said this in the press conference yesterday, but he expounded on it with Grant and Danny. We've been successful with the Capitals. We've been successful with the Mystics. We've been successful in e-gaming. We've been successful in acquiring a television network. We have won everywhere, and not just won. We have been continuously competitive, right? Winger used the term yesterday, generational competitor. And that's what they've been. Again, they haven't won as much as I think a lot of us think they should have. But it's hard to win championships. Should they have more than one with Ovechkin? Probably, but they got the one, and they've been right in the mix for the better part of 2 decades. They have been consistently excellent with the Mystics, including a championship and another finals run in which they lost. I know nobody cares about the e-gaming stuff, but like, would you rather them be good at it or suck at it? Like, prove to me that you can build a winner in another business, in another model, in another way, in another industry. And they've done it. So, like, is that going to help you win an NBA championship? No, but it proves that, like, and the thing is, forget proving to us, it proves to Ted, like, you got to keep trying. What you're doing is not right because you figured it out in these other lanes. And what Ted said to Grant when he pushed him, like, well, what's it going to take for the Wizards? Or why hasn't it worked for the Wizards? He literally goes, I don't know. If I knew, I would have done it by now. And I'm not in the business of, or in the habit of just forcing compliments to billionaires for humility, because billionaires and humility don't cross very often. But there's a level of humility in that statement that I appreciate. Like, hey, man, like, if I knew the answers, you think I'd be on yet another executive? You think I'd have 0 championships, 0 50-win seasons, 0 conference finals appearances in my ownership? No. The first step to getting better is acknowledging that you don't know what to do. Now, does Ted probably have some thoughts beyond that? Yeah, he knows some of the steps. Dude's been in the NBA for 20 years. Does he probably realize at this point that one of those steps is getting a star player, and that's why he wants to be a destination? And does he probably realize that Bradley Beal's not that star player? Yes. Could he have recognized that a year ago and not given him a max contract with a no-trade clause? Like, that would have been nice. I don't know what the epiphany was, but better late than never. But at the end of the day, like, there was a lot of trepidation around whether or not whoever he hired, before we ever knew it would be Michael Winger and Will Dawkins, that whoever he hired would have the ability to actually make changes. And pretty instantaneously, I felt good about that. I think I probably said it the night that we stayed on an extra hour when Shepard was fired. You don't fire a guy, especially when you are someone who pays attention to the bottom line in the way that Ted Leonsis does, for better or for worse. When you run your business like, you know, a business, and you pay attention to budgets and contracts, and you actually don't like firing people, it's not a fun game to you. It's real human beings, and, you know, an admission of a mistake on some level that you didn't want to make. He doesn't fire Tommy Shepard unless he's ready to do something different. And he's not hiring people to come in and do the same, which would lead to the third quote of the day that I thought was the most interesting. And actually, Anthony, I think we can pull this in the break and have it ready next. But Michael Winger said, we're not running it back. He didn't say what they're going to do, but the reason Michael Winger's here is that if they simply wanted to run it back, they wouldn't have pushed out the last guy. And I think that's really important to remember, even if they don't make massive changes immediately. It's a long-term plan for change. And I do think Leonsis both is serious about wanting to make changes and allowing them to do that and having the patience to allow them to do it correctly, which is essentially all you want from a sports owner. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Take your calls next on what's next for the Wizards, 301-230-0980. Plus, you'll hear that clip from Michael Winger with Russell and I yesterday here on the Hoffman Show.
You can listen to the Team 980.
Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Ava Wallace on all the Wizards comings and goings at the top of the hour. 5:30, you also hear Take Command. Logan and I recorded this morning talking about Sam Howell and Jacoby Brissett. Has Howell done enough to lock up the job going into training camp where they're not going to split training camp reps? That was my key underlying question to Logan. The answer at 5:30 today. Right now, though, more from yesterday's Wizards introductory press conference, including this quote from Michael Winger, which, you know, I was intrigued but not surprised at how consistent everybody was yesterday about, we don't have a plan yet, we don't know, Bradley's awesome. I mean, I guess, like, even Will Dawkins going as far as say there's not a decision to be made about Bradley Beal, a notion that I kind of rejected and reframed with Michael Winger and got a better answer out of. So, you know, maybe that's on me as a question asker. But there's a question to be made about everybody on the roster. You know, players are under contract. Okay, we have to decide whether or not you want to trade them. That's the nature of basketball in the NBA, and business in the NBA. Now, Beal has a say in that, unlike every other player in the league. But, okay. But they said we haven't made up our mind yet. And I think for them, committing to anything right now would be very silly. It's smart for them not to do that. It's smart for them not to say we are definitely open for business. We're trading everybody. Everybody's on the table. They don't know, because if they're like, yeah, we kind of hope Porzingis leaves or whatever, and then he opts back in, or, you know, Kuzma, you want to keep open your options for sign and trade or just bringing him back on a contract that you think is fair. There's a lot of different avenues this team can go, and you just don't know on draft night. Could there be a deal? You know, you say, hey, we're staying put. Draft night, someone offers you 2 first-round picks, and one of them's in the top 5 this year for Beal, and you're like, and somewhere he would go, and you're like, oh my God, like, we got to do this deal. So you don't want to box yourself in. But there is also a baseline that this team was a 35-win team last year who just fired its general manager, which is why all of you were here. And even if the big three had played all 82 games, their winning percentage in the, 25 games that they played, extrapolated out, multiply times 82, and it's a 38-win team. That ain't good enough. And I was just kind of looking for some acknowledgement of that somewhere along the way, and I got it from Michael Winger towards the end of our interview with myself and Chris Russell.
I mean, I guess to put it bluntly, the team as constituted hasn't performed.
Yeah.
Hasn't performed up to the level that they themselves probably wanted to perform. And running it back as constituted doesn't seem like a very wise pursuit. And so sometimes making that change accelerates the progress. There's a team in the finals right now that at its core doesn't look a lot different than it did a year ago and 2 years ago and 3 years ago. But they made a couple of tweaks in the offseason, and now they're in the finals, up 2-1. So sometimes it's just those incremental changes that can have pretty substantial results, and that's really what I meant.
That was in response to a question about he had this quote in the Washington Post piece that he did with Ben Golliver, where he's like, sometimes change for the sake of change accelerates progress. And, I think sometimes you just got to mix it up. Like, you might not know exactly what the best path forward is, but if you just keep putting the same product out there, you don't get any new information. So sometimes it's like, all right, well, we don't know if this is the right move yet, but it's going to provide us more information to eventually get there. And especially when you're in year 0 of what you expect to be a multi-year rebuild, there's no magic solution. There's no magic elixir. There's no magic anything right now. They can't make one move and be a championship contender. No one's giving them that piece. The best you can hope for is a team like New Orleans, which, by the way, Brad's not going to, or a team like Memphis, which, by the way, Brad's not going to, looking at Zion with, dear God, if you've been off the internet and have avoided what's happening with him, congratulations. Everything that's going on with Ja Morant right now, and they are like, yeah, we're out on our guy, and we think your guy can help us get where we want to go. Like, let's make a deal. That's the best chance. You need someone who's young and, top 5 player in the league potential to become available. And those players don't exist. So it becomes, how do you get one of those guys eventually? And the answer is obviously draft picks and things falling your way in the lottery, or you get super lucky by being on the right end of a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander trade, who's the young guy who just played a year that maybe averaged 12 points a game, but is going to average 23 next year. Like, that's what you need. And so the idea that is one move away. And then, by the way, Shai, it's now MVP, top 5 this year, but it's not like they made the Paul George trade and got Shai last year. That's an extra 3-4 years of development after you get the guy. So knowing that, just making a move, shaking this thing up here, making a rattle here, can help unlock new doors, unlock new pieces of information. And then, if you're the Denver Nuggets, for instance, you have the core pieces, you wait for Murray to get healthy, you keep, tweaking around the edges, and now you're in the finals. It's about the best way you can build it when you have the pieces. Of course, you got to figure out how to get the pieces. You can draft him in the second round like they did Nikola Jokic. Like, that's a good plan. But that involves an amount of luck that we've basically never seen in the history of the league. 301-230-0980 is the phone number. Your thoughts on everything that we've been talking about with the Wizards. Let's go to line 1. Tony, what's up, man? You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, Craig, how you doing, man?
I'm good.
I looked. Oh, okay, cool. I looked at the press conference and everything. I think they are going to make some move, but they just not revealing it right now and everything. And I'm going to propose a question that I asked Anthony before I'm talking to you. When Brad was back in his good old prime back then, who was the best guard, point guard he had, Wall or Westbrook? Because when he had both of them, he shined more. He was a better scorer, even though. So I would say if they had to go out and if we had to keep Beal, we need to go out and find another guard, such as like a Wall or Westbrook. Maybe he'll come around again and he'll be that type of scorer. 2, again, I don't think I would get rid of Porzingis because he's a tall 5 that can shoot from the outside. So if anything, anybody we replace with between him and Kuzma, I think it's going to be a setback. And you know what we're going to do? You're going to look like that baseball team that's around the corner from you. And that's not going to draw no fans and everything else. So, but Winger did say, regardless of the fact what type of team that they assemble, it's going to be a fun team. So I'm just hoping that they acquire the players that we need, that will draw folks out again, and hopefully they can find some shooters too, because we desperately need shooters because we was hurting last year from the 3-point line. So I'm hoping that they really acquire the real 2 players that will at least get this team back off the ground. Nobody said we're trying to win championship no time soon, but hopefully we can be respectable and be better than a 7 or 8 round team. That's all I had to say, Craig.
Yeah, Tony, thanks for the call. A lot of good stuff in there. Look, I don't know that a style of play is necessarily going to be the thing that gets people in the seats. I think winning does. Like, the Grizzlies in the grit and grind era played a pretty rough brand of basketball. Like, it was defense, it was nasty, it was low post ball, and they embraced it because it worked. If you're throwing the ball to Zach Randolph every possession and he's backing dudes down and throwing up these little lefty hooks where he can't jump over a phone book, and then Marc Gasol's blocking shots on the defensive end, and Tony Allen's like doing his thing, and you're scoring low hundreds points per game, and you're losing, nobody's embracing calling it grit and grind. They're not playing whoop that trick in the arena and having a blast. It's like, damn, our team can't score and we suck. Like, that would be the realistic intake of that. By the same token, if the Golden State Warriors are just a team that flies around and hits a bunch of threes, like man, this is entertaining, but eventually it becomes old because they don't play defense. People showed out and have sold Oracle Arena out and now whatever it's called, Chase Center out, because they're excellent on both sides of the ball and are championship caliber. If you acquire the right players to win, you will win. On the guard point, This is actually pretty fascinating idea, and we can talk through this more on the phones next for anybody who wants to call in, 301-230-0980. If Beal puts his foot down, for now at least, and is like, I'm not getting traded, do you just try to maximize the roster now? Or do you just say, man, I don't care. We're building for post you, whether you're here or not. We're not winning with you, so we're going to try to accumulate assets like, I think a player that would be phenomenal here is LaMelo Ball, right? Let's say he wants out of Charlotte. They're going to draft Scoot Henderson, number 2. He's like, I don't really fit with him. Can y'all just trade me? Like, I'm out. They sign in, works a sign and trade. They were willing to pay Kyle Kuzma a bunch of money, whatever the thing is. And LaMelo Ball winds up here. However that happens. That's a great fit with Brad. He's a good shooter. He can create and help Brad stay off the ball. Like he's not what John was. He's not what Russ was, but like similar enough stylistically that you probably unlock a better version of Bradley Beal. But to what end? How many games are you winning? Can Porzingis, Beal, LaMelo win 50 games? Like, I don't think so. I just don't. I think it's a 45-win, 46-win team. It's better. If Kispert plays well, if they keep DeLon right, they maybe flip Monte Morris for something that's a better fit. Like, whatever the machinations is, not trying to kick anybody out of town. Thanks, Monte, for coming on a zillion times last year. To what end? And that's, I think, the struggle is if you don't trade Brad, what can you possibly do to win with him? And I just don't think that answer exists unless someone like Giannis or whoever gets really mad at their organization and wants out. And then you come down to, is DC the destination that Ted Leonsis wants it to become? And do you give up what Michael Winger gave up to get Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to get that guy again? Of course you do, but he's got to want to be here as well. And can you afford him given what you're paying Beal? That becomes where the TV money in a couple years comes in. So it's a lot of factors. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. More calls lined up, so if you're on hold, stay there. We'll get to you in 3 minutes on the Team 980.
Here's what's trending on the Team 980.
Speaking of picks and trades, kind of a wacky trade today in the NBA. In a rare trade involving an NBA Finals participant during the Finals. The Nuggets are acquiring a 2024 first and second round pick and a 2023 second round pick in a deal with the Oklahoma City Thunder for a protected 2029 first round pick. So the Nuggets get a Thunder pick this year and a a first round pick next year and a second round pick in 2023 as well to try to extend their championship window. They know they're going to have to get some cheaper players. In return, they will give the Nuggets what certainly the Thunder hope is a really good pick in 2029. That is what's trending. I'm Craig Hoffman on the Team 980. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Taking your calls on the Wizards, 301-230-0980. Then talking to Ava Wallace coming up at the top of the hour. Take Command follows that. So a lot of great conversations coming in the 5 o'clock hour. Also, Tony Massenberg. He's very tall. He's also very smart about basketball. He will join us coming up at 6 o'clock to talk about the Wizards and the NBA Finals. Go back to the phones now, 301-230-0980. Let's go to Darren. Darren, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hi. Thank you for taking my call.
You got it.
Excuse me for being a little dumb on the sports stuff. I just like to watch, but I'm 60-something years old, and I'm just curious why, since Wes Unseld, I watched this team try everything. I mean, swaps, trades, this, that, but never get mistakes in it. I just don't understand why they never tried that. Why that's not the number one idea or the number one thought. Like the NFL, they'll cash in all their marbles for Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. I just don't get it. Maybe you can help me understand. And thank you for taking my call.
Darren, real quick before you hang up, you said, why don't they go after a center, like a dominant center? You broke up right as you dropped your idea, which was a heck of a place for your phone to be mean to you.
He accidentally hung up.
Oh, he hung up. Okay.
Yeah.
That's what he told you, though, Anthony, right, when you screened the call?
Yep.
Okay. First of all, Darren, you give yourself more credit. You don't say those mean things about Darren about being dumb about sports. That's not very nice. Let's be kind to ourselves. But it's a good thought in terms of like, hey, even in the modern shot happy NBA, like Joel Embiid just won MVP, and the Sixers have been very competitive. Nikola Jokic obviously shoots threes, but he is dominating the NBA Finals, and even to an extent Miami. A team built around Jimmy Butler and a lot of great players runs in part thanks to Bam Adebayo's excellence, and he is now a routine all-star player. The thing is, though, like, the question you should ask yourself whenever it's like, why haven't they tried this, is how would they have done it? And that's the trick of it. Why can't they go get a LeBron James? Well, because there's one LeBron James. Why can't they go get a Joel Embiid? Because it's hard. And, like, you draft a big man, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get Daniel Gafford, who's a really solid big man and is outperforming his draft slot in a lot of ways. But and obviously they traded for him, but he's not dominant by any means. You get a Porzingis, he's limited in certain ways. There's certain things he can and can't do. They haven't really picked in the top. And this is, I guess, the struggle with being mediocre, right? The problem is they've been too good to be terrible enough to get great players, except for really twice, without obviously getting lucky, like Denver did with Jokic, right? But they had John. Consensus, that's who everyone would have taken number one overall, and he was great for a decade and helped them make a lot of playoff runs, but ultimately they didn't get the help they needed to help him break through. Brad, they picked third overall. He's been a very, very good player. I would say could they have maybe done better in that draft? I'd have to go back and look. I'm sure a lot of you listening remember that off the top of your head. But he's been an all-star caliber player multiple years. Outside of that, they've been a lot of eighth, especially recently, 8th, 9th picks. And, they could have done better in those drafts. It's part of the reason Tommy Shepard isn't here. But it's not easy. And in terms of trading for someone from another team, if a player's good, you don't want to give him up. It's really hard to trade for good players unless they want to be traded. And this is something, to Leonsis' credit and Winger's credit, that they mentioned yesterday. They've got to make this place a destination. They've got to make it so that when teams or a player of Paul George's caliber, of Kawhi Leonard's caliber, of whoever the next guy who wants out's caliber, Kevin Durant, etc., wants, and especially Durant, considering he's from here, but when those guys want out, they're like, DC's on my list. And that just hasn't been the case with the organization, and it's one of the things I think Leonsis wants to figure out is why has that been the case, and what do we do to fix it? Real quick, before we get to Ava, let's go to Ken in Upper Marlboro. Ken, thanks for calling. You're on the Hoffman Show.
Hey, I sit here listening to that clip you played about with Wes Unseld. One of the things that he didn't mention playing defense whatsoever. He said we have to get stops. What does that mean? To me, it means nothing. To me, it means your players do not listen to you. That's what it means to me. And my thing is they need to revamp that whole staff there. I'm starting with the scouts. Because the players that they bring in here, they're not even developmental projects. They just sit on the bench. You don't know you literally don't know what you got until you find out that you go into overtime, and so many players have fouled out. I like Bradley Beal, but if they need to blow it up, just blow it up. That's what I think they're going to do in the long run anyway. And I hope that the gentlemen that they brought in here, I hope they have certain scouts in mind where they get players, where they can develop those players over the next 2 to 3 years. I don't like to see players sitting on the bench that long. I don't even know half of their roster, up to about 7 players. That's it.
Ken, thanks for the call. Yeah, I mean, you've identified some real issues. I did follow up because a lot of what Wes talked about in the one clip that we played was about offense, and I followed up on defense. So if you want the full interview, you can check out the podcast. Of course, Hoffman Show podcast, anywhere you get your podcast. That interview is also on YouTube on my page and 980's page. So check it out there. Just search, my name and Wes Unseld, and it should pop up. So there is a little bit more detail, but part of it is like they've got to listen to him more, and he's got to figure out how to get that message through. Part of it is getting players who are more locked in on that side of the floor. 3 20-point scorers is great, but 20-point scorers aren't always locked in on the defensive side. So that's too many guys on the floor who, aren't invested on that side of the floor. And some of that is also hearing the same message from everyone in the organization and getting that to be more consistent, which the new front office will help with. From a scouting perspective, yes, I agree. They have not done a good job. How much of that is Tommy versus how much of that is other scouts in the organization? That is something they will have to find out. We don't know. We're not privy to their internal conversations. So I think Ken brings up the correct points with the frustration of a fan who's been watching this team for a long time, and I fully get it. But that is kind of the job of these guys coming in, is who do we have in-house that has perhaps been ignored and not elevated, but is actually good at their job and we can keep and empower and include in our decision-making process that can help us, and who has been the one who is not because of any kind of malice, but just because they're not that good at their job, has been helping lead the franchise down the wrong road. Is that Tommy and Ernie before him overriding scouts? That kind of stuff happens. Happens a lot in pro sports. The GM just really loves the one player, even though the scout that scouted him is like, I don't know, man. Has that been the case? And I'll say this too, last thing, because part of that felt like it was directed at Johnny Davis, and makes sense to me. Because, yeah, it's frustrating that Johnny Davis basically missed his entire rookie year. I also think he looked pretty good at the end of it. And, guys that now spend time in the G League playing for the Go-Go can still become really good players. Just not going to happen. He's 20 years old. It's not going to happen on the immediate timeline that you'd expect a number 1 overall pick to be more impactful. So if Johnny Davis is good next year, then I guess they did the right thing. But I think that it's not just the scouting, it's the player development. And that's an area that I know is being revamped, in part because they already fired their player development coach a couple weeks ago. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. We get back. Ava Wallace joins us to talk about basically all the things that we're talking about right now. It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. That is the voice in the open there of Logan Paulson, who you will hear from coming up at the bottom of the hour on a Take Command Friday. Yes, a Take Command Friday, rare occurrence, because normally we record the pod and put it out on Thursdays, but today we did that on Friday. Just wanted to get through OTAs, the whole deal. So fresh new Take Command available in your feeds. If it's not out already, it will be soon, but it doesn't really matter to you because in 30 minutes you're going to hear Logan's observations on the quarterback situation headed into the summer right here on this radio show. Right now, though, we continue talking Wizards for Not My Beat.
Today's top story from the perspective of someone who's there.
You are looking live.
This just in.
Not My Beat.
Joining us now is Ava Wallace from the Washington Post, their Wizards beat reporter. Ava, just big picture yesterday, walking out of, was it District E that we were at? What's kind of your big takeaway from what everybody said and the whole event there at Gallery Place?
It certainly felt like a different vibe to me, honestly. It felt really fresh and really new, and that's kind of what you get when you finally break away from the Grunfeld era and bring in guys who have experiences at places like Golden State and Atlanta and OKC and the LA Clippers. Like it felt very fresh to me. It felt like a good start. I kind of left feeling like if I were a Wizards fan, I would at least start allowing myself to maybe consider being excited about this company. Yeah.
That was so couched, so tepid. Maybe you would consider.
I got a lot of trauma too, so
yeah.
But start thinking about it is all I would say. It was a promising first start for sure.
For sure. And the thing that I walked away from, and we obviously got to sit down with Winger and with Dawkins. I know you got a little bit of time with both of them as well, is like the young, Ted said, like, I was looking for a new next generation executive and like these guys, it's their time. And to me, they really embody that. And look, Will Dawkins is 3 years older than I am, and just kind of which is also great. Like, what am I doing? I guess hosting afternoon drive is not terrible, but I mean, he's an NBA GM. So the kind of way they just approach the conversations with us, the way they generally approach everything, I feel like was very new age. What struck you about that and kind of the generational difference between these guys and say a Tommy Shepard and Ernie Grunfeld before
Absolutely. It was really struck. I kept thinking about who is going to kind of be the new face of this front office, the new face of this iteration of the Wizards. Is it going to be Wes Unseld Jr., who's staying on as coach? Is it going to be Michael Winger? And it seemed to me like if I had to pick based off yesterday alone, I would pick Will Dawkins. He's the new GM coming over from OKC. Like you said, he's 37. To your credit, though, you did not have to live in Oklahoma for 15 years. So there is that.
That is true.
No shots to Oklahoma, but
that was kind of a shot at Oklahoma City.
That was like a
which is like
shot.
a fine.
Apologize to everyone. Anyways.
Yeah, it's a fine place to go for not 15 years.
Yes, there you go. But he kind of struck me as the guy who he had a couple of lines ready. He was clearly very comfortable in front of the cameras. He had a good relationships with a lot of reporters, a lot of agents, and kind of people who are milling about the room. He was a broadcast journalism major, which I was just like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
He said, thank you for the questions. I was like, don't butter me up because it'll work. But yeah, he definitely seemed like he was going to be the guy who maybe was a little bit comfortable with being more forward facing in the Wizards. And Michael Winger really seemed like he was definitely excited to kind of share his thinking and how he was kind of starting to piece his plans together. But he definitely seemed to me, at least from what I gathered yesterday, like someone who would kind of stay in the shadows and be kind of masterminding from up above and behind the scenes. Whereas he's got a great group of executives now who can step in front of the camera and explain to people, hey, here's what's happening. So that was kind of interesting. I could kind of see and envision down the line how this would work from a media standpoint and from a messaging standpoint for sure.
Yeah, it feels like we'll get Winger. Like, I mean, he'll do the random interviews, whatever. But like when they have a draft press conference, it feels like Dawkins is going to be the guy, and like that's what they want. Day-to-day operations, it's more his, and the scouting stuff is more him and Schlenk, and obviously Winger has opinions. How do you feel like Wes fits in with them? Because that's another thing I've always kind of thought about Wes is he's kind of similar in demeanor, the way he approaches things, the way he talks about things. I feel like isn't too dissimilar to these two guys, but you've had a lot more experience with Wes than I have. So what do you make of how Wes fits in?
Yeah, it was so funny. It was very clear that Michael Winger and Will Dawkins, back from their OKC days, have a good relationship off the bat. That's what Will Dawkins, I kind of asked him, I said, you're 37, really sharp guy. Like, why are you signing on to come work under somebody? Once you get, I know there are only so many GM jobs in the league, I said, basically, but Michael Winger also yesterday said, when the decisions are made, it is my final decision. So I asked him, who wants to come and be someone's number two? And he said, what I wanted to be here for was to work with Michael Winger and to be in this market, but mostly it was his relationship that he had with Michael. And he said he was really, really excited to work under someone as sharp, who had such deep relationships with agents. All of the things that Ted Leonsis has kind of been saying are the things that he made him attracted to Michael Winger in the first place. So yeah, it was like you kind of saw that group stick together and say, okay, these guys have prior relationships. Travis Schlenk was, Winger actually called him when he was working in the Clippers and said, I might have something for you after Schlenk got let go in Atlanta. And that's how he kind of ended up here. But Wes doesn't really have really strong relationships with those guys. So it's kind of, he's the last kind of vestige of the old guard showing up and saying, I know this city, I know these people, I know basketball. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he meshes with him. Vibes-wise, I can see, Wes Unseld Jr. is an easy guy to get along with. He's a straight shooter. He's very serious. He takes himself seriously. He's got a good sense of humor. So I can definitely see that. But that's going to be kind of the main relationship that has to grow. And I think it'll be easier for him to make those relationships happen when he knows he's not kind of dealing with three disparate opinions in Schlenk, Winger, and Dawkins. Like, it does seem like those three guys will be on the same page and making opinions. And I think that makes it a lot easier for someone else to come in rather than say like, oh, I got to talk like this to this guy and say this to this so he doesn't tell the other guy. Like, when the three people who have the good relationship are already together, it makes it easier for one to come in from the outside, I think, in a business setting.
Yeah, Ava Wallace with us from the Washington Post here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. And for whatever it's worth, Wes mentioned this yesterday. I know Winger did as well. Winger interviewed Wes for the Clippers job when they eventually hired Ty Lue. So like they have talked before, but not obviously worked together. Let's just stick with the Wes and the basketball stuff for a second. I want to circle back to like the bigger picture stuff. But Wes said something to me yesterday when he was on with us, and he might have said it other places as well. So I'm not trying to just like take credit, but he said it to me in our interview because I asked him about basically Bradley and the like if you keep him, what's the way that he fits into a championship level basketball team? Like what's his role? What's his usage? And how do you conform that to be more successful in terms of winning basketball games? And he talked about the modernization, and he had mentioned this in another answer as well, but modernization of their kind of basketball philosophy. He talked about their shot diet. And for Brad specifically, he's got to take more threes. And I know that last year, like Tommy seemed to be very much behind putting the ball in Brad's hands and making him this quasi point guard. And, obviously you can do both. Dame takes a lot of threes. Steph takes a lot of threes. Technically, they're point guards. But what do you make of that comment? Not just like the correctness of it from an analysis basketball standpoint, but the fact that he clearly has this idea. He's the head coach, and there was something in the way of him implementing it sooner.
I don't even know if that's what I would take away from that comment, although there might have been. I think the biggest thing that's in the way of allowing Bradley Beal more open space and more time to kind of maneuver and take threes is that they haven't had a point guard as good as John Wall. Like, when people started talking about Bradley Beal needing to take more threes, he was playing alongside John Wall. And at that point, yes, he should have been taking more threes because John Wall could set him up better than just about any point guard in the NBA at that point. They haven't had a John Wall since, Russell Westbrook, of course. But since Westbrook left, they haven't had someone where Brad can actually kind of take his foot off the gas in terms of being a ball handler and actually just kind of fully embrace his shooter mentality. So I understand what Wes is saying there, but I do think you're missing pieces if that's what you're trying to do, especially when you do have other shooters like Corey Kispert kind of on the floor. And I know that he didn't play with Brad super consistently last season, but when you talk about modernizing the NBA, I don't think that all falls on Bradley Beal's shoulders. I think you have to look at the group that you're working with there. And that's something that you need Will Dawkins to help you with. Like, you need all the scouts who've been working all year and looking at this draft. So I totally understand what he's saying, but I think that's a hard thing to do when you don't have the right pieces on the floor. And you can't just do it with one guy. Like, Bradley Beal's too good at creating his own shots to say you have to only think about shooting threes when there's no one else on the floor who is as good at kind of being the in-between 1 and 2 guard as well.
Yeah. In terms of like shot diet, and then I asked him about the defensive side, and he said, there's a lot of stuff. Obviously, he's like, we did some good things, but we have to be more consistent, effort, attention to detail, all the things that you'd expect. As someone who covered basically every game and talked to Wes after everyone that you were there for, like, how much of that is? I'm trying to not use the word indictment of him as a coach, but I guess I don't know how else to say it. Like an indictment of him and his inability to take these ideas that he clearly has and get his players to do that versus he didn't have the horses. Like it was a roster construction issue, or there were other forces inserting different ideas. Like how do you kind of, separate that, not necessarily to just hammer people with blame, but to identify how they can fix that moving forward?
I think it's never just one or the other. It's always a little bit of it's on the coach to kind of get his guys to pay attention and more than get his guys and explain in a way, like really win the locker room. Because it's not like these NBA players are not understanding what Wes Unseld Jr. is telling them. It's, does he have the locker room or not? And then the second thing is, I don't know if you would say that Wes Unseld Jr. had the best roster for what he wanted to implement in terms of how many two-way players does he have? How many, really strong two-way players who can go and defend. And it's obviously an extremely hard thing to do in the NBA to defend for an entire game and then run back and be brilliant on offense as well. But I think it's going to be a little bit of both. And in terms of how you go ahead fixing that, I think when the front office and the coaching staff are on the same page, how you implement a player like Daniel Gafford on defense, that gets solved. That's something that you can hash out. Or if you decide, hey, we actually want to bring in a different type of player completely for what we want to do, that's something that irons itself out when everybody's on the same page in terms of the overarching direction of the Washington Wizards. And that's what we've been told is exactly what Michael Winger is here for, to say this is to give this team an identity, really. So once you have an identity in terms of here's how we want to be, it's way easier to draft the type of players that you need. It's way easier to tell those players exactly what they'll be doing from the get-go so they want to listen to the coach later on. Like, it's a trickle-down effect when the front office and the coaching staff are not on the same page.
Definitely. Ava Wallace with us from the Washington Post. I wanted to check in with you on a quote that Ted gave Grant Danny yesterday. He was asked about Tommy and kind of why now for the change in the whole deal. And he said, I don't like terminating executives, but when you present a plan that everyone believes in and then you make a different decision and that snowballs, that's what ends up with multiple bad decisions. Do you have any idea what he's talking about there?
Just in terms of
like what plan did he make? I'll read the quote again because I've read it now in front of me, 5 times and I still not sure exactly what he's talking about. He goes, I don't like terminating executives, but here's the crux of it. When you present a plan that everyone believes in and then you make a different decision and that snowballs, that's what ends up with multiple bad decisions. So what's the plan that everyone believed in and what's the different decision that Tommy made that all of a sudden leads to this diversion where he is gone?
That I'm not sure, but I can't think of one specific thing that he's talking about where it's like, we all agreed to draft this one guy and then we ended up with a different guy, something like that. You and I have both been in press conferences with Ted Leonsis before. Like sometimes his quotes, you have to really dig for actually what he means or really think about it for a while. So I don't know if that's something I'm going to be able to pull if he was referring to a specific thing or anything like that. But I do think it just goes back to the fact that everybody knew that this front office not just wasn't on the same page with the coaching staff always. And, in reporting that out, people will tell you different things of, no, it's not a fight. It's not a disagreement. It's just like a difference of opinion that we're working out, which happens in every single NBA club. Sure. Like that's super, super normal. But when the front office isn't on the same page, the way that it's now pretty well known that Sashi Brown and Tommy Shepard were not, I don't know if that's what he's talking about, but it just helps to have one person at the top. Like the thing I wrote about today in kind of explaining the structure of this front office and why it's different from maybe monumental basketballs of past, because you still have the structure where you've got someone who's a president. That was Sashi Brown supposed to be. He was supposed to be the big picture guy and tell me how these basketball teams are going to work, and Tommy Shepard was going to do the GM. So on paper, this new structure is pretty similar. But what's different is you hired one person at the top, not Sashi and Tommy working equally, and you let the guy at the top make the hires below him. So you're not just throwing a bunch of, grown men executives together and saying, okay, now you guys work together. You're saying, I'm bringing in people who I want to work with, who I know kind of think the same way as me, or if they don't, have ideas that I value and experiences that I value. So I think that's going to make a huge difference in terms of how decisions like that get made. Again, I just can't stress enough in all this kind of confusion. And even Will Dawkins said himself, like, it's going to be janky. We're going to be stepping on some people's toes until we figure it out. And that's okay. But for Michael Winger to come out and say, that's true, and the final decision is mine,
right,
that makes a difference.
Yeah. He, it's so funny when he was adamant yesterday, and he like stepped in after a great answer from Will about the kind of dispersal of responsibilities. And he was like, just to be clear, and he was saying the final decision is mine, not as like a power play, but as an accountability thing. Like
yes,
at the end of the day, like if things go wrong, and then he kind of, quietly dropped a line that Sean McVay uses all the time in the NFL, where he's like, if it goes right, it's your credit. And he's pointing to Dawkins. If it goes wrong, it's my fault. And that's how Sean, I remember when he was here as the offensive coordinator and I covered him, he always talked about that with players. He's like, if it goes right, I won't take any credit. It's all the players. They made it happen. If it goes wrong, it's my fault. And now sometimes, you get them off the record, and this happens to a lot of coaches, they'll give you a little bit more honesty about a certain thing. It's like, yeah, we had the right play call and this guy ran the wrong route or whatever. But like public comments, anything and that the way that keeps a team together, like that, the fact that they understand that, I think is essential. And that's obviously, I think, why probably a guy like Will Dawkins was very happy to leave Sam Presti, which is a big thing, and go work for Michael Winger.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, just to kind of start things off on that foot at the introductory press conference and make it really clear from the get-go, is going to help set the tone, I think, of what had been a very muddled top of an organization. It seems a lot more clear, at least to me now. I tried to explain what everyone does. The only person who I'm not still quite sure is John Thompson III, who was promoted to be senior vice president of Monumental Basketball. And I asked him what that means yesterday, and he said, everybody else has a pretty distinct lane. I'm the only one who doesn't. I'm kind of going to be helping whoever needs help with whatever they need. So if he's being deputized to help Michael Winger kind of shoulder the load of these three clubs here, that's going to be interesting.
He can be the institutional knowledge guy.
Sure.
Hey, where's the box of things?
Right.
That's John Thompson's job.
You do need
sometimes, sometimes literally, sometimes proverbially, where's the box of things? That is the other thing that I think really struck me yesterday, was just how authoritative Winger was. And not, again, in like a power has gone to his head kind of way, but even sitting right next to Ted Leonsis, sitting next to your billionaire boss, and when asked, do you have the ability to completely tear it down? The kind of direct question that is almost grandstandy in the way it was asked yesterday, in a way that like puts the Wizards fans who were out for blood, like, yes, that's the question. And the fact that Winger didn't, sidestep the question, well, we don't know what our plan is yet, whatever. He just was like, yes, I do. I have full authority. And to not even look at Ted, not whatever, like, to me, that was a moment yesterday. And also, again, I don't really have a question here, just kind of continuing the conversation along the grounds that we've been going on. That to me, like, was another prime example of just how clear the power structures, the responsibilities, and these things that have been very messy are now under this new front office.
Yeah, I think the big moment for me, I agree that was one. And I agree also that he sounded very self-assured to me, it sounded like he was confident in his thinking and his opinions without feeling like he needed to have answers yet. Like there were a lot of, I don't know yet yesterday. Will Dawkins said many times he got into town Wednesday night and the press conference was Thursday at noon. So he was just like, I can tell you how I look at this thing. I haven't looked at this specific thing yet, so I don't know. But I always appreciate, especially as a journalist, when someone I would so much rather you just say, I don't know, than make up an answer. That's totally fine. And it was really interesting to me when someone asked if Bradley Beal, Kristaps Porzingis, and Kyle Kuzma will be here at training camp. He said, I don't know. And part of that was because he made sure to say, Kristaps Porzingis and Kyle Kuzma have the power there because of free agency and the player option. So he kind of couched it in that a little bit. But I do appreciate that he didn't just say, well, Bradley Beal's an incredible player and da-da-da. He didn't dodge it. He said, I don't know. I have to look at it. And that's something that we're still looking at. And to me, that's someone who has, like you said, not just the belief of ownership behind them, but also a lot of self-assuredness to not say, I'm going to tell you people what you want to hear right now, but just honesty. It was good.
Yeah. Ava Wallace with us for another minute here on the Team 980. Last thing I'll ask you about is exactly that. With Beal specifically, Will went as far to say with us that, like, there's no decision to be made on Bradley Beal. He's under contract. They clearly have not had a chance to sit down as a group yet and discuss what they want to do with this roster. However, they've been watching the NBA and working in it for a long time. They know what's up. There's only so much to talk about. They all clearly somewhere deep inside them have an idea of what needs to happen, even if they haven't, wanted to verbalize that yet. So I guess my question is, how much do you believe them? How much do you believe that they really don't know versus they deep down really know and they all just need to say it to each other in a room so that they can be on the same page?
I think they all have some ideas, but they haven't gotten a chance to really dive into anything yet. Like I genuinely believe that. And I'm sure they all have their opinions of Bradley Beal and know him very well. He's been in the league for a long time. When they say there's no decision to be made, he's not entirely wrong. The guy's got a no trade clause. So I could see you saying, like, technically it's one of those things where it's like, it's accurate, but it's not true.
Yeah. It did make me reshape my question when I asked, because we had Dawkins first, and when I asked Winger about it, I was like, Will said there's no decision to be made, but there's a decision to make on every player. That's the nature of an offseason. And that kind of, that got us past that gate, and I got a little bit more insight from Michael than I did from Will. But, in that sense, like exactly what you're saying.
No, there's absolutely a decision to be made. I mean, I think there's a decision to be made on every single part of this organization. And that's what they said yesterday. Like, they are starting from the ground up and they are going peg by peg and seeing which pieces fit together. I thought it was really interesting that aside from this new front office, pretty much everybody who's worked for the Wizards for the past couple seasons who hasn't already left for other jobs, the few people that have, were there. I mean, Wes Unseld Jr.'s entire coaching staff was there. One of the G League assistant coaches was there. The Go-Go general manager was there. All of the PR staff and people who worked for Tommy Shepard and everything. Everybody was there, which made me think that they just haven't started yet. Because, I was kind of like going in ready to have my pen and paper out and make notes of who's still there and who's sticking around and everything. But when everybody's there, that just means decisions haven't been made.
Yeah. Ava Wallace.
Except for players, I would say. No players there.
That was interesting. And some of that is like guys get out of town. Like, it's been months since the season. But I kind of figured like
other stuff too.
Yeah. That was curious, especially because like NFL press conferences, when they introduce new head coaches and stuff, there's a lot of guys that are there. Even guys that don't wind up playing for that head coach because they get introduced in January and then they get cut in February. But like, I did notice that. That was bizarre to me. That, like, I was kind of surprised Bradley wasn't there, to be honest. For the radio audience who is not watching this on YouTube, that was a big shoulder shrug from Ava. Ava Wallace, Washington Post, with us here on the Hoffman Show. Always appreciate your time, man. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
This is the Hoffman Show on the Team 980 and the Odyssey app.
It's the Hoffman Show on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app, streaming on YouTube, youtube.com/at the Team 980. Full episodes to Take Command on 106.7 The Fans YouTube page, clips on my YouTube page at Craig Hoffman. And right now, some observations from Logan Paulson and I on Sam Howell, Jacoby Brissett, and the quarterback situation in Washington from a fresh episode that, to be honest, I don't even think is out yet. You heard it here first. That's where we're at right now on this Friday edition of Take Command on the Hoffman Show. Logan, let's start with the quarterback play. You actually went back and charted all three practices, and let's just start kind of big picture. What are some things that you noticed, key trends for what reputationally was an up and down week for Sam Howell, and I think a solid week for Jacoby Brissett?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what I thought too. Before I charted it, because when you're watching, you're like, oh, that's kind of a weird throw, or that's kind of this. And when you go back and chart it, you're like, man, he's been crazy efficient on the shorter, quick game stuff and the intermediate stuff. So 5-step drop, 3-step drop, screens, that type of stuff. They kind of had a fake RPO in there, completed that. But when you look at that on the chart, you're like, that is really good. It's very high completion percentages. He's getting the ball where it needs to go. He's getting that ball out on time. The thing that I was a little surprised when looking at the practices after kind of going through all of it was that when the ball is getting pushed down the field, he seems to have a harder time with that stuff. Now, the coverage is tight, all that kind of thing. But in terms of delivering shots down the field in a team setting, so team blitz, team pass, it's just not as clean. I think he threw an interception on the second day where he probably should have thrown the dig. There was a big corner basically kind of clearing out coverage, and there was a dig. He kind of forced the corner, and you're kind of like, why'd you do that? There was the interception that he had the day before. He kind of tried to force it down the seam. It bangs off someone's helmet, gets picked off. And so when you kind of went back through all of his interceptions, even from OTAs, they're all of that kind of stuff where it's it's a little late in the down. He's pushing the ball where it doesn't need to push, and he doesn't anticipate the deep ball with the same dexterity that I kind of had in my mind, right? He was really, really good, short, intermediate stuff, and then the deeper stuff was a little bit, not that he didn't do that, because again, in 7-on-7, for example, he had a beautiful ball to Cole Turner in Tampa 2 that's a little bit behind, but kind of right where it needs to be, and Cole drops it. Not Cole's fault, would have been a tough catch, that kind of thing, but so he has shown flashes of that, but I'd say on the whole, he struggled a little bit more with those lower percentage throws, pushing the ball down the field.
So that's super interesting because it fits some of what I think most of us took out just watching it live, being there, but not necessarily all of it. Definitely the quick game stuff, which you almost take for granted because it's so quick, it's so efficient. It's just okay, well, that next play, got it. But that's going to be a huge part of their offense. So if you can just, that's good. Next play. Yeah, let's do that all the way down the field, and then you get in the red zone and you got to execute, or you hit a big one and cool. Where I felt like he struggled from what I've been able to see in the two practices I went to and talking to obviously fellow beat reporters that have been out there for all of it is some of the stuff over the middle. We had discussion of whether his height is actually a factor because it seemed like when he got into 7-on-7, that stuff was a little bit better. And maybe the offensive line, he just hasn't figured out the windows yet. So there's all that kind of, I don't want to call it narrative because it's stuff we saw. It's just when you're able to go back and watch the film, you're able to see it better, clear, more context. You chart it, you kind of start to see some trends emerge on paper that maybe you miss because you're trying to string things together just in your head. So I think that's interesting because it did feel like when he pushed the ball down the field, that was some of his better stuff, but maybe that was more 7-on-7, less team, and is that even accurate once you chart it out? Or is that just, certain plays taking up more space in your mind than others that, when you kind of even them out on paper, it's actually a more even performance?
I definitely think it's the latter there. I think because when you're watching, you're like, oh, wow. And I was the same. I did the same thing, and that's why I was surprised by what I charted. You know what I mean? I was like, oh, he's been excellent at this. And you kind of go through and you're like, it actually hasn't been that great. And I think it's also important to give it some context. Those throws, league wide, are a little bit more like lower percentage, right? You're going to hit 50% of them. And so the big ones, you're like, wow, that's great. Like for example, on Monday or Tuesday this week, he overthrows Terry McLaurin, right, on a go where he beats Emmanuel Forbes badly, like just misses, right? Next play to Jahan, kind of overthrows again, and it tight coverage. But you're like, you don't kind of put those in the box of like deep throws, but those are deep throws, and you kind of remember the big ones that he hits. But he also has some misses, and those are lower percentage throws, so his percentage is going to be worse there, and that's totally fine and to be expected. It's interesting the thing about the middle of the field, because I do feel like there are times where he doesn't see the middle of the field unless it's like a big receiver. And that's like Logan Thomas has been pretty good over the middle of the field for him, but Logan Thomas is like 6'7". So, like he can see that guy, he can make those throws. Also, their connection, we're going to talk about this more later, has been amazing. It's been totally on point. So that's been really cool to see. But I definitely think the stuff where it's like we're attacking underneath space was better in the analysis. And it should be better because it's a higher percentage throw, but it just kind of jumps out to you a little bit more definitively. And again, when he just seemed a little bit more deliberate, I guess is the word, a little bit more delayed, like he had to see it, as opposed to trusting the ball and getting it to where it needs to go, where I felt like that's where Jacoby did a pretty good job of that. But Jacoby's also holding the ball for a very, very long time to get there, And so it's, I kind of subtract points for Jacoby's throws down the field sometimes because they're a little bit too long. And I feel like Sam, again, kind of had some misses down there that, and misreads. I put it all in the same pile. Missed throws, misreads, all that kind of stuff, at least how I identify them. So, but I think overall, I think the first day was a little rough, but going back and watching it wasn't as rough as I originally thought. But he down the field, I was a little surprised. Not as good as I had kind of intuited to start.
Something that I think is worth pointing out and kind of underscoring again here is that, you get into some of these specific periods and they're working on certain things, and you might call, if you're Bieniemy, 6 straight dropbacks. That's never going to happen this year.
Correct.
And so this is where, like, I have come out of this spring, my big takeaway is this really isn't a change. Like, the most important thing is Bieniemy. But it becomes even more apparent how key the play calling is, because there's certain stuff that Sam executes at an extremely high level. And if he just calls that stuff as often as he can, then I feel like they could be decent on offense, or maybe even, hold your breath, good. And on the other side of it, he's got some stuff that's much higher risk. And if they put all that on Sam's plate, like they could be in trouble. But I think you even got to see, it was the day I was out there, so it was Wednesday, how some of the play calling comes into it. I mean, they got a screen, like 80-yard touchdown on a screen play in one of the team periods that, they've been working different stuff, and all of a sudden they throw it in there. They hit the timing just right. They hit the misdirection, and next thing you know, was it Gibson? No, it wasn't Gibson, or maybe it was Gibson.
It was Gibson.
He's out. Like 80 yards, truly not practice out, not like, oh, that's cute. The running back did the running back in training camp thing where he runs all the way no matter how many people would have tackled him. He was out. And so if you can set that stuff up well, then go execute it. Again, I think this offense has a ton of potential, but these specific drill settings, I think, underscore how important the play calling is, and to make sure that you give the quarterback the stuff that he's good at and that can execute it consistently at a high level.
And it's also important to that end that the shot plays are usually off of some type of play action, and in these periods, like, because they're not running the football, they're not even, it's like a token fake basically, and everyone knows it. That the windows in the back end are really, really tight. And I think I expect them to be looser as they game plan, as they prep, as they coach routes to beat specific coverages. And those shot plays will kind of open up a little bit and become higher percentage throws, because that's what they did in Kansas City. Also, I think to the screen thing, that was awesome. That play was great. They had another one that they hit on Tuesday, kind of to B-Rob, was also a big play. That's team blitz. And so, it kind of goes both ways. It's blitz if we call a screen and we hit it versus this cover. That's what you want. You want screens versus blitzes. But they got it hit perfectly. Sam Cosme's running down the field. Sadiq Charles is running down the field. You see the athleticism of those guards. You see guys, the left tackle, I think it was Leno, how they block it to ensure that the defensive end's not pursuing to the football. Gates, does a great job kind of capturing the 3 technique. Like the coaching is so high there. So yeah, I definitely think it's the sequencing of plays is huge. The execution of plays is huge. And I think the efficiency of Sam Howell is definitely correlated or related to that, because one of the reasons he's so efficient underneath is because guys are running better routes. The concepts are better. The windows are better, and they're tight windows and tight throws. And he's done a great job of getting the ball there. So, I like what Sam's done. And I think that was the other thing. When I went back and charted the throws, you realize like how efficient he's actually been and how on time he's actually been. And those things are important to me in my evaluation of a guy who could potentially be the starter. So,
situationally, I know they worked on some of that stuff, especially on Thursday. Fortier was on the radio show with me and said that it was wildly up and down for Sam through a couple of interceptions and then through like 3 straight touchdowns. How did he look situationally, third down periods, red zone periods?
Yeah, so I actually thought there was some really good stuff that he did in the red zone. Again, the timing's important. It is red zone. You're not going to run the football. Coverage windows are small. I thought the first interception was not his fault at all. I thought it was entirely on Kemp. And I'm not, because, Kemp's had a pretty good last couple of days. So I don't want it to be like, oh, everyone kill Kemp. Like, he's had a good couple of days, and him and Sam seem to be developing a rapport. Like, for example, just to kind of show you what Kemp's been able to do on the first day, so Tuesday, he has a route versus Emmanuel Forbes and just kind of big bodies him, like throws him by on a stop. Forbes almost falls down. Easy catch for a first down. You love that from your big receiver. In the red zone, however, he's running a crossing route. Percy Butler's cutting the crossing route, and I think he felt like it was zone. Like they're in some type of match coverage. To me, it plays like man. We had this conversation with Matt Ryan, right? How it's zone, but it really is man, and that's kind of what he fell into there. And he should have kept running, and he sat down. And Percy, and so instead of throwing the ball, he's throwing the ball to a spot, because I think he's versus man coverage on those crossing routes, you got to keep going. Versus zone, you sit down. So Sam read it as man, Kemp read it as zone. Kemp sat down. He throws the ball. He throws the ball literally right to Percy Butler for an interception. So to me, wildly inconsistent, whatever. That.
The results are inconsistent, but that's why we go deeper on it to say like, okay, well, Sam actually plus there, good throw, good read, throws with anticipation. The problem is when you throw with anticipation, sometimes the receiver doesn't do what you anticipate, and sometimes it's their fault because they should have.
Yeah, and I'm assuming that's what the receiver should do. I don't know for sure, just based on other offenses. I think that's right. His second interception, however, I thought to Troy Apke, I thought was his fault, and it reminded me a lot of the interception he had in the Dallas game. I think he's getting used to kind of defensive back speed. So what I mean by that is they had like a corner or some type of sail route to the back pylon, and instead of just putting that thing high and like where only his guy could get it, he kind of sailed it back there, kind of like he did against Dallas, where he kind of put it up to Cam Sims on the corner. There's a guy underneath. He's trying to get it over the top, but you got to put a little bit more velocity on in the red zone. So Apke kind of runs back under it, makes a pick. I think that's on Sam. I think he's got to kind of develop in that skill set. And another thing I would say is a couple plays later, he gets Curtis Hodges running basically like a high cross. So he starts on the left side of the formation, running high across to the back pylon. They kind of, they pin the coverages down to the other side. Everyone's running stops. The throw is there. Logan Thomas had a touchdown on this against the LA Chargers 2 years ago. Same kind of concept. It's open. And instead of kind of delivering that throw we just talked about, kind of, fast and high, give your guy a shot because all that space is there, gets a little gun shy, pulls it down, scrambles to the left for a no play. So I would give him a minus there because I'm like, I think if you want to be an NFL quarterback, in a red zone situation, that's a throw. I think you got to give your guy a shot there. And now that's my opinion. I would tell him that to his face if he asked me about it, but he might say, hey man, we're not coaching it like that. We're coaching a different read. And I'd be like, totally fine. But when I look at that, I say that throw, that little kind of that dart over the top throw that's got to get up and down really quick. He seems to be having a hard time with that. He had a hard time with it last year. He's a young player still. He'll get better. So to me, I'd say overall more bad than good because some of the bad wasn't his fault.
Yeah. More good than bad, you meant to say.
Yeah, more good than bad. What know what I meant? More good than bad.
I did. I just want to clarify because now, in case anyone wants to twist it, and of course, I'm going to twist I'm going to twist your words and just say you're biased. You want more tight end touchdowns.
I do. I want more tight end touchdowns.
That's all you want. You just want your guy.
That's really the crux of it. I mean, Curtis had a touchdown yesterday. Logan had a touchdown yesterday. Bates had one. Come on, we got to get those guys the ball more. So they're doing a great job. So
yeah. So let's answer the fundamental question real quick, and then we'll get on to one of the tight ends, Logan Thomas, and then some of it what Antonio Gibson did. But if you're Ron Rivera and you're opening training camp, they do have one more practice next week, but it's one practice, whatever. You get to training camp day 1 in July. Is Sam getting all of the 1 reps? Or are you starting to hedge your bets and give Jacoby any 1 reps? And I think I know which way you're leaning. I know what Ron said, but in your opinion, did Hal do enough to remain QB1 without any competition?
Yeah, so I think before I went back and looked at it, I was kind of like, maybe been a little up and down. But after I went through and charted everything, 100%. He deserves it. He's been efficient. Again, he's thrown picks. He's made mistakes. He's a young player, but the talent's there. The arm talent's there. The release is there. The way he's reading stuff is pretty good, man. He's making some plays. He made a really nice play. I think it was Wednesday, where he kind of rolls to his left on a sprint option, and Logan Thomas, so it's a 3-by-1, so there's 3 receivers to the side he's rolling to. Logan Thomas is running an out, and the other 2 guys are running goes, and the coverage is perfect. There's no throw. Logan Thomas stops, and then he kind of opens his shoulder and delivers just a total strike to Logan Thomas in the soft spot of the zone, and it was a heck of a throw. And so he's had enough of those kind of splash plays, and he makes hard stuff look easy on some of this underneath stuff. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And if I'm Ron, I'm betting on that potential. I'm betting that, he doesn't make that same mistake in the red zone. He's not going to force that football there. Or we can game plan throws open for him a little bit better than this when the team doesn't know that it's team pass. So I think looking at that, I think he deserves that opportunity. And it's also because Jacoby, again, I have some reservations about how he's been playing the position. He's done a really good job. He's a good football player, but he holds the ball a little longer than I'd like him to on some concepts. And is that his fault all the time? Absolutely not. But I like the rhythm and timing with which Sam is playing. And so I want to see more of that. And I'm sure Ron feels the same way.
He does. That is what he said. His answer was a less descriptive version, as you would imagine. He's a head coach. You're a podcaster, at least in your current form. Sorry to reduce you to just being a podcaster.
Yeah, just a podcast.
In your current form here on this, podcast. But his answer was very similar. He's done enough. He's going to be our guy. And I regret the way I worded the question, because when I say without competition, it is still a competition.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And it's just like if they're running a race, Sam got a head start. If he stumbles and falls down or runs super slow, and Jacoby takes off and is able to perform at a super high level, Jacoby would catch and pass him. That's how races work. But they've run either the same speed, or Sam's run even perhaps, based off what you just said, a little bit better. And so Sam has maintained that lead, and thus it's still a competition. He can still trip and fall. Jacoby can still pull, do something amazing and have, a couple great weeks, and maybe they're like, man, this guy's awesome. We need to start him. But realistically, the most likely outcome from the prognosticators is that Sam will open the season as QB1, and that's the outcome I think everybody would like to see, except for maybe Jacoby Brissett. But even Jacoby knows the score. He knows what he signed up for.
And I also think that's why you have that joint practice with Baltimore.
Yep.
Again, circle that sucker on your calendar, because if Jacoby comes out and is dealing, because he's seen it before, he knows what that's going to look like. And Sam is sputtering a little bit, because again, while our defense is good and they've been playing great in this period, and I think that's really forced Sam to elevate his game, it's not going to be anything like what they're going to see in Baltimore. And so how does he handle kind of prepping for a new team, game planning for a new team, in these different practice situations? And I think Jacoby's going to have a little bit of a leg up there. And again, Jacoby's done a good job. I just think Sam's been a little bit cleaner with some of the stuff. So, it'll be really interesting. It'll be really interesting to see that training camp, that joint practice, some of the preseason stuff. So
I tend to think that after those practices, Rivera will officially name the starter.
Doesn't it feel that way?
There's no reason to do it beforehand.
Right.
And afterwards, there's kind of no reason to wait. That is the spot. That's the piece of data that you're waiting for. You get it, you name the starter, you move on. Final hour of the Hoffman Show on a Friday here on the Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Streaming live on YouTube. Yes, you can watch us at youtube.com/at the Team 980. Right now, we head out to the hotline. Welcome in our good buddy Tony Massenberg, NBA analyst, of course, works with NBC Sports Washington. Tony, how are you, man?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Always great to have you. Always great to talk, whether it's Wizards hoops or just the NBA at large. Actually, Tony, I'm going to dish to you. I'm going to let you make a decision here. Do you want to start with the Wizards or do you want to start with the NBA Finals? Because I would like to talk to you about both.
Let's do the Finals.
Okay, let's start with the NBA Finals. Let's start with actual basketball that is still happening right now. It has been fascinating to watch this series because every game feels like it's had its own profile. But as you've now taken in 3 of them, as we all have, and prepare for Game 4 tonight, is there something that you feel confident about, a through line through these 3 games that you feel really confident? If this thing happens, then this other thing will happen. This result will happen for one of the 2 teams.
When the Denver Nuggets meet the challenge from a hustle stat standpoint, when I say hustle stats, I'm talking loose balls, rebounds, defense, force, and turnovers. When they're playing with the same intensity in that area of the game against the Miami Heat, combined with them having a talent advantage, a size advantage, an athletic advantage overall on their team, it's going to be difficult for the Miami Heat to win, to beat them. I predicted that this series will go 6 games to Denver, but honestly, if Denver doesn't have defensive breakdowns and lapses, it's going to be very hard for Miami to overcome the other things that I just highlighted. When you talk about their ability to score, probably the best 2-man game, one of the best 2-man games we've seen, and definitely the best 2-man game going right now, and the best player in the world, and Jokic, when you talk about overall impact and what he means to their team from an offensive standpoint.
Tony, how happy are you that you don't play in the NBA and have to guard Nikola Jokic, that you played when you did, when people like him didn't exist?
Well, I would have liked the challenge. I can't say I'm not happy about playing in this era because I would have actually loved to have played in this era. I was a guy who played, 2, sometimes 3 positions.
True.
And I defend all 3, and that's one of the big things in the NBA. It's not about whether or not you can score from a couple of positions, but can you defend 3 positions? And I could do that. And I think, the fact that they do play a lot of small ball, at 6'9", I was playing a lot of center. I'm a natural power forward, and I got to play power forward, considerable amount of my career, but I actually played center more because there were so many guys that were 6'9" to 6'10", and a lot of those guys could not play center against guys like Patrick Ewing and Hakeem Olajuwon, David Robinson, Shaq. These were my regular defensive assignments on every team that I played on. So to play in this league where I'd essentially be matched up on a night-to-night basis with more guys that were closer to my size is something I would relish. But I often look at the Joker and I say to myself, what in the world would I do with him? Because, a lot of guys, if you can just keep them away from the basket, that makes it difficult for them to be effective. But with his ability to shoot the basketball from 3, to play on the interior, utilize his size, and as I've said so many times before, the first big man that I've ever seen have guards take the ball out of bounds after a made basket, and he literally brings the ball up the court and initiates the offense. I mean, we saw guys in my era sometimes get it off the board and go coast to coast, but we've never seen a center initiate the offense like a point guard the way that he does.
Yeah, it is funny because, on the plus side for you specifically, you were a wrong era guy. There's just certain guys that you're like, man, if he could have played 10 years later, 20 years later, depending on who we're talking about, that would have been the better era. But on the good news, you didn't have to deal with Nikola Jokic, because that's the thing that I don't know that people really realize. I feel like maybe now that he's in the NBA Finals and they've talked about it on the broadcast they do, this dude's a legit 7 feet tall. So it's not like he is skilled in more your size, 6'9", can play center, but has guard skills. This dude is 7 foot 280 doing this, Tony. And to your point, I don't know how you reasonably expect to even slow that down, nevertheless stop it.
Well, the thing is, in our era, we didn't have very many big guys that could stretch the, floor out to the three-point line. One of the guys that would give me problems, and I played against him the 2 years that I played in Spain, was Arvydas Sabonis. And he's the guy that I compare the Joker to more so probably than anybody else that I can think of from a skill set standpoint, because even, in the 90s and the 2000s, Arvydas was able to shoot three-pointers. He could pass, better than any big guy at that size that I had ever seen. I mean, he's 7'3", about 320. And he was shooting threes, when he got brought to Portland as, I think, a 28-year-old rookie. And he made the all-rookie team his first year playing in the NBA as a 28-year-old rookie. And it was that skill set is what jumped off the page to everybody. He was shooting threes. When you passed the ball to him in the post, he was able to find guys cutting off of him, better than most centers. And he also, clearly could play with his back to the basket. I mean, he had a Kareem skyhook. He was a difficult cover for everybody. He even gave Shaq problems despite not being nearly athletic as Shaq. So he's the only guy that I could really compare to from a size and skills standpoint. Tim Duncan was a guy that I, had to face every day in practice. And Tim could stretch the ball out, stretch the game out to the three-point line. But, again, we ran the offense through Tim from the box, whereas when you look at the Joker, as I said, he initiates the offense from the three-point line as well as from the box.
Yeah, definitely. By the way, the kids, listen, if you don't know some Arvydas Sabonis, and you've never seen that man play, go to YouTube and watch his highlights. Dude was like 36 years old, had no knees, and was still killing it in the league. It was an incredible player. Tony Massenberg's with us here on the Hoffman Show on the Team 980. So Miami's challenge then is to say, okay, we know we have to give you something because you're that good. You're going to take it, but you try to limit in other areas. Easier said than done, but if you're Spo, what are you trying to limit so that you force Denver into at least a more difficult offensive night where they have to earn it as opposed to getting whatever they want, which is, how they end up most nights with how good they are?
Well, I think the blueprint for Miami's success was in Game 2. There was a combination of them, first of all, making three-pointers, and secondly, limiting Jamal Murray's effectiveness somewhat. And again, Jamal Murray didn't have a bad game. He just didn't have a 30-point triple-double like he did in Game 3.
Right.
The formula for me is you try to slow the Joker down as best as you can, but, nobody's been able to do that. But you cannot allow other guys to get off against you. You've got to find a way to slow down Jamal Murray. You've got to make Aaron Gordon less effective. You've got to make Braun a little more less effective. You look at some of these other guys that they come off the bench with. KCP, who's a starter, you have to keep him limited as well. You can't let the other guys have great games, because if you do that in conjunction with, the Joker's excellence, then, again, the formula for success is not going to be there. But if you can limit these other guys, and to a lesser degree, let Joker score 50 if that's what it is. If you limit everybody else, you can win the game that way. But, trying to limit these other guys and you not be able to do that while at the same time allowing the Joker and Jamal Murray to both have big nights, you're not going to beat the Denver Nuggets. And, part of the problem for Miami, when I look at, the rebounding factor, the Denver Nuggets are considerably bigger at every position. I mean, every position, they are considerably bigger. And that comes into play a lot of times when you talk about the rebounding. And even defensively, Miami is struggling to get clean looks at the basket when the Denver Nuggets are engaged. They were not engaged in Game 2. They left Miami open for wide open threes, and that's one reason why they were able to win that game. If they don't do that, it's going to be difficult for Miami to turn this thing around.
No doubt about it. One of the weapons that Miami has is that zone. And if you're going to build a team to beat a zone, you want like a tall guy who's a good playmaker that can play out of the, kind of at the free throw line area, and then a bunch of shooters. So you'd build the Denver Nuggets. But at the same time, Tony, I think the reason it's worked in stretches for Miami is it takes away that two-man game from Denver, and it makes them beat them in other ways. Did you see enough from Denver in Game 3 against the zone that if you're Spo and Miami, you kind of say, okay, maybe they've figured it out. We got to stay away from it. We got to try something else. Or would you go back to that tonight in Game 4?
Well, I would definitely go back to the zone in spurts to see, if whether or not Denver is hitting shots, because that's what you force them to do. Unfortunately for Miami, what happened in Game 3 is even when they were able to limit the two-man game a little bit, and I don't really know how you say you limited the game, the two-man game a little bit when you look at, the scoreboard and you see that Jamal Murray scores 34 and Nikola Jokic scores 32.
It worked in Game 2. Game 3, not so much.
Exactly. So there's not a whole lot there. And then the other thing, Jamal Murray also had 10 assists, which meant that, even during the times that he wasn't able to get a shot himself, he was finding other people. We're used to the Joker getting 10 assists, but if Jamal Murray is going to get 10 assists as well, that speaks to how he's finding other guys in that zone. So I think you mix the zone in, but you can't look at that zone as a way to stop them because, again, when you look at Denver, they also can shoot the basketball from beyond the three-point line. They didn't shoot the ball particularly great in that game, but they still won because they dominated in the painted area. So that's where, again, you start to find those holes in that zone, and that's one thing that Jamal Murray did well. And, if you're the Miami Heat, you just have to come out to a lesser degree and hope that you can force some turnovers with Denver and allow yourself to get some easy baskets. The problem for Miami is that they sometimes get in these spurts where they struggle to generate offense. And that's been a historical problem for Miami. They had somewhat overcame it in the playoffs where they were, starting to knock down threes with some of their guys. But, we saw that kind of rear its ugly head in the last game where they were struggling to get shots and put points on the board. And you can't do that against the Denver Nuggets.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Obviously, the other side of that is Miami's got to hit shots. If they hit shots, they can set their defense. It is self-fulfilling in that way. But if you're Miami offensively, how do you try to attack Denver knowing you can't just rely on them not being locked in like you got in the first two games? Game 1, they don't hit a lot of shots. Game 2, they do. They split those games. But how do you generate quality offense if you're Miami, considering their skill sets and their size disadvantage that we've already referenced?
Well, I think you try to utilize Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo as best you can in pick and roll scenarios, because if you do that, then you put the Joker in a position where he, is basically facing someone who is quicker than him, and that sometimes can allow you to get, to free yourself up, to play downhill. Because what happens is if you're Denver, you don't want to see the Joker constantly having to jump out to try to stop someone from turning the corner, or, you don't want to see him constantly in position where he's on his heels defensively trying to make a decision, rather to pick up the roll guy or to try to, get isolated out by the three-point line with a quicker player. Outside of that, when you look at again, I keep going back to the size advantage that the Denver Nuggets have over them. If Denver's engaged defensively and they're contesting shots, it's a different ball game than what Miami saw against the Boston Celtics, because Denver is a bigger team and they're capable of challenging shots better than the Celtics did, pretty much across the board. So, if you're Miami, you have to play at a fast pace. You got to hope to be able to generate some fast break opportunities, but ultimately, you got to get a lot of movement in your offense and try to, replicate what happened in Game 2, which is to get guys freed up for open shots and hope that you can knock them down.
Tony Massenberg, NBC Sports Washington, NBA analyst with us here on the Hoffman Show. All right, so, Tony, let's say as we shift real quick to the Wizards and their new brass before we let you go here, You get a call from Michael Winger, from Will Dawkins, whoever, say, hey, we're soliciting, outside opinions outside of the front office. We know you've obviously watched this team pretty much every game though that last bunch of years. We're just trying to get like different reports and trying to figure out what we're going to do with this roster. How would you describe the strengths and weaknesses of this Wizards team and how and how that sets up for Winger and Dawkins to attack retooling and revamping this roster?
I think you look at this Wizards team, and again, it's a little bit tough to say because we haven't seen them consistently play one style of basketball, like an identity. I'm not sure they've actually formed an identity, but the first thing you want to do is establish a culture. And rather that culture is we're going to be the type of team where we're going to beat people with our versatility because we have a number of guys, between 6'5", 6'6", up to 6'9", that can play multiple positions, interchangeable guys. I think when you look at this team, versatility could be your strength, your ability to basically switch everything, guys that are able to handle the basketball, particularly in the open court. And so maybe the identity of this team is to take advantage of that versatility and utilize the depth. Go as far into the bench, playing different lineups as you can, because sometimes that can be very effective when a team doesn't necessarily have one guy that they can specifically key on. I think when you look at the fact that Kuzma's a great scorer, Bradley Beal's a great scorer, this team has versatility. Chris Kispert is a guy who shoots the basketball exceptionally well. So I think when you look at this team across the board, they've got a lot of guys that are kind of in the same mold, but they can find a way to make that work for them. And so I think versatility with your roster, the fact that you can play a style of basketball, hopefully that's fast-paced for 48 minutes, you could challenge teams. You have to be a well-conditioned team and a deep team to play a fast pace and be a team that can put points on the board on a nightly basis. So I think maybe that's a, potential formula for the Wizards, but ultimately it's anybody that comes in, they're going to have their own vision. And I'm sure that's going to play out by way of the draft. And if they are to make any other moves as far as trades before training camp, we'll see what type of roster they have come the first day of training camp. And that'll give you some idea of what style of basketball they may be willing to commit to.
No doubt about it. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this on the way out. You mentioned all your years in San Antonio, and that's a team and an organization that, with Pop and obviously with Duncan and everybody over the years, like they had an identity. They know who they were. Everybody knew their role. They did it as well as anyone has done it for really NBA history. If you want to talk about length of time, it was almost 20 years that they had that. How does a team go about building an identity? Like, what are the tangible steps? Because we hear that, and it's very like I don't call it idealistic, but it's very untangible. So, what are some of the steps that an organization can put in place to start to really build a foundation and an identity that isn't as reliant on one superstar being available or some of the other ways in which teams can win under shorter periods of time?
Well, I think you have to establish the identity of what you want your franchise to be, and that starts at the top. And then you draft the players or sign the players who are, from a personality standpoint, going to buy into what that identity is. That's what they've done in Miami. That's what they've done in San Antonio. And then those guys have to be willing to enforce that identity amongst their teammates. That's all part of establishing your culture. And your culture goes as the leaders of your organization goes, from the executives on down to the players, the top players on the team, enforce that identity and that culture to, the rest of the roster. And then you have to have personalities that are like-minded in the way of thinking what type of team we want to be. Can you commit to the team goals from a personality standpoint? And then once you have the personalities, you also have to make sure that the talent, that the skill sets are skill sets that can complement one another. So it's all a collaborative effort, starting with management, getting the type of players that they want to fit the identity and the culture that they want to establish, and then having those players, the older players on the team, the more experienced players, establishing that identity with the younger players, and then everybody buying into what our team is going to be from a mindset standpoint. That's how you establish your culture and your identity. And then lastly, you have to commit to that for the long haul. And that's what's been established in San Antonio. A lot of people think that the culture that exists in San Antonio was established by Greg Popovich. It actually wasn't. It was established by Larry Brown. And Coach Popovich was an assistant under Larry Brown, along with R.C. Buford, who was the president.
Right.
They have worked in conjunction together to establish that culture and that identity that actually started with David Robinson and Larry Brown. And that accountability that Larry Brown had over David Robinson, as well as everyone else, is what Coach Popovich has used as his motto when it comes to the likes of a Tim Duncan, Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, and so on. And because those guys had the type of mentality to buy in, they were able to pass it on through the rest of the team. And that's why the San Antonio Spurs are who they are, because, number one, Coach Popovich established it with the later generation, and Coach Larry Brown established it early, and Coach Popovich learned from that, and that has been the formula for their success.
And then, as Pop will always tell you, that the winning does come with the talent, but the standards can start without it. Now they'll get Victor Wembanyama. We'll see how quickly they can get back to the winning at the highest levels. Tony Massenberg.
Let me say this last thing. One key element that I left out. It's development. You have to develop the guys that you bring in, and that's where I think San Antonio and Miami are exceptional. You have to develop the talent that you don't always get the most talented guys, but if you develop them to their maximum potential, that's how you have guys who can come in and help you in crucial situations. And that's where I think Miami, Oklahoma, also San Antonio, these organizations have separated themselves because of their ability to develop everyone from 1 through 15 on their roster.
No doubt about it. Such a great point. And the Wizards have already started remaking that part of their organization, something that Michael Winger will continue to do over the next couple of weeks and months. Tony Massenberg, a dozen years in the NBA, great on television. We always love having him on the radio as well. Tony, appreciate your time, man, and have a great weekend.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Tony Massenberg, everybody, with us on the Hoffman Show. We get back. Anthony and I will do our best to follow up that analysis with our own Game 4 coming up tonight. is the energy we needed. Where was this at 4 o'clock? It's the Hoffman Show on Team 980. Always live as well on the free Odyssey app. Seriously, Anthony, I've been like dead all show. I feel like I've put on a good performance, but I'm fighting through the tires. I did just have like a liquid IV situation. I was like, maybe I'm just dehydrated. I do feel a lot better. I feel way more alive. So between the hydration and a full standing Anthony dance,
You're alive.
Also, is your do-rag like velvet or does it just look velvet on camera?
It's velvet. It is velvet indeed. I actually have a red one and a green one. And Coco Louie just asked for a do-rag. So I was like, what you need a do-rag for? And she was like, I don't know. I just like the velvet do-rag. I was like, all right.
Yeah, you got to, for the radio audience, not what, well, if you missed the last 3 minutes of the YouTube, you missed a lot of quality Anthony content. But
Quick question, Craig.
Yeah.
Do you think I'm a colorful in terms of like wearing like clothes and stuff? Do you think I'm a colorful guy? Because my friend, I got on the phone with him and he's like, dude, you have the most colors ever in terms of like what I wear. Because I have on a neon shirt.
You right now, pretty strong case. You are currently wearing a neon shirt and a violet velvet do-rag.
Yeah.
What are you wearing like black pants or something though, or you got
I am
like
wearing black pants.
Okay.
I offset it, you know.
What kind of shoes we got?
I have on black shoes too.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's just waist up. It's everything that's on camera right now.
Pretty much. And the thing is, I lost my black do-rag, so that's more so why I'm wearing purple. Like I just grabbed the do-rag and
It was like we just got to keep the waves. It's not a fashion statement.
Yeah, that's more so what it was. I was telling him, I was like, I mean, I'm going to work, like I'll be all right. I think I'll be cool.
Yeah. You do definitely like have a vibrance, I think, to your wardrobe.
Yeah, I definitely wore bright
You're not
orange.
like, it's not, I wouldn't say it's like overly loud, but colorful for sure.
Yeah.
And you're not gonna wear like a bright orange shirt and lime green pants. That's one step too far.
Yeah, that is.
For your aesthetic.
I know my limits, I think.
Yeah, like if that's your thing out there listening, like by all means, go ahead. Not Anthony's aesthetic.
Yeah.
I like a pop of color. I like a flash of color. That's kind of where I live.
Thank you, man. You make me feel good.
Yeah. Glad I could help with that.
No problem.
So are the Nuggets going to be up 3-1 by the end of the night?
That's a great question, but I think not.
I am so torn on this because here's the thing. Like this is the thing with the finals and with many playoff series, right? We've done this, what feels like 8 months ago with Lakers Warriors, but that was like last month. Point is, like, we see one game happen, we just assume it's going to repeat. That's not how this works. Teams make adjustments, different things happen. Guys wake up on the wrong side of the bed and have a crap shooting night. They drink their special coffee. Their favorite barista's there in the morning, or it's Jimmy and he has his coffee that's so expensive that nobody else can afford it. But like for everyone else, your favorite barista makes your latte in the morning, and all of a sudden you have the shooting night of your life, and get a bounce here, get a bounce there, and it's a totally different ball game. And sometimes that happens within playing the same and just missing or making shots, and then sometimes you have truly different games. And that was the thing about Game 3, where it was a different game. Denver played at a higher intensity and with more attention to detail. And it was weird because we agreed. We didn't feel like it was NBA Finals like intense, but I think that's because Denver controlled the game and like the way they played it, like they just make it look easy. And the competitiveness level is there, obviously. But there was also, I think the other thing about that Game 3 that was odd and made it feel not super intense was there wasn't any drama. There was no moment where the game is in the balance. Get a little tight at the end when Duncan Robinson hits those couple of threes. And there's that moment where Bam gets the offensive rebound, and if he just turns around and hands it to Robinson again, he's got a chance to make it a 6-point game. But instead, Bam takes a very stupid mid-range jumper and misses it, and that's kind of the game. But I assume Denver will come back with similar intensity tonight. they needed Christian Brown's 15 points. I don't think they'll get that. And then the question is, what does Miami get? Like, I think this is going to be extremely close. And I think a lot of times these series, like, you get a blowout here, a blowout there, or non-competitive. They fluctuate. One team adjusts, another team has a wildly different performance, and then by the end, they kind of settle into these very tight games. And I feel like we're kind of at that point in the series where Denver's figured out how to play in the NBA Finals. Miami has known how to play in the NBA Finals. Denver is so skilled and so big that they're up 2-1 despite what I just said being true. And now if Miami can hit a few more shots tonight, we're going to be in for a great game. And I don't know what happens. There's also a chance that Denver's figured this thing out and they might still win it in 5 despite what happened in game 2.
I'm still just waiting on the Jimmy Butler game. I feel like,
Can I be honest, Ant? I don't think it's coming.
Ooh. So I think I know where you're leaning then in terms of tonight's game.
I don't know that it has to come, though, for him to – like, I don't think Butler scores 48, Miami wins is a way they win a game, but I still think they could. Like, I could definitely see them winning tonight.
Yeah.
But, like, I just think between him being tired from taking on so much earlier in the playoffs and the fact that we're 100 games into the season, and he hasn't had monster games, really. I mean, the 28 he had in game 3 was like the best game I feel like he's had since he sprained his ankle. And so maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like that was a precursor and actually here comes the Jimmy game because his ankle's finally feeling better. But he hasn't done that in a long, long time.
It's more so I'm looking for him to have his imprint on an entire game, whether it's, efficient scoring, whether it's, on the defensive end and him getting like steals. He has 1 steal in this entire NBA Finals.
That's crazy.
1 steal for as great of a defensive player as he is, how smart he is, IQ-wise. I'm just looking for him to, have his prints all over the game. It could be assisting the ball, things of that nature. So I think Jimmy, he has to just, come out, lead his troops. Because, again, he was getting beat to loose balls last game. So the Heat are only going to go as far as him, and I think he really needs a huge game and a must-win game 4. This is home court. You got to be able to defend it, at least split it going back to Denver.
Have to. Otherwise, celebration in Denver on Sunday. One thing that I also appreciate that Tony said that I think is smart, I'm going to expound on it. They made such a concerted effort in game 2 to let Bam play true point guard on offense and get Jokic involved in a lot of stuff in the screen and roll. Jokic is never going to be accused of being the most athletic guy, but that doesn't mean his conditioning is bad. So it's not like you're going to wear him down necessarily, but can you put him in awkward spots? Can you make him defend? Can you potentially get him in foul trouble? It very rarely happens. He's so smart. He's got good hands. He's got good feet. And again, not a stopper, but can keep himself out of trouble. But he is one of the weaker defenders on the floor. So how do you get him involved in pick and rolls and just get looks off of that? Also, you pull a 7-footer and the best rebounder maybe in the entire league, but certainly in the series away from the rim. Because that's another element of this that I'm curious from a lineup standpoint. Does Kevin Love, who saw only 16 minutes in game 3, see 20 to 25 tonight? I could definitely see that, in part to continue to space the floor and keep the size, but also from a rebounding perspective. Caleb Martin had 15 rebounds in one of the Eastern Conference Finals games, but he's 6'5". Like, is he enough to come in and clean up and get that rebounding, part of it under control? It's going to take a group effort from Miami. If I had to pick a team in the NBA to do a group effort kind of win, I'd pick the Miami Heat. I'll say Miami tonight in a close one, like 2-point game. They win it, tie it up, going back to Denver. And then Denver wins the series in 6. But I don't feel good about it. And I think Denver is clearly the better team, and it is just a matter of them locking in, focusing, paying attention to detail, and then it comes down to shot making, and I trust Denver to make the shots.
Yeah, I think I'm going to go with the Miami Heat in a close one as well. Again, they held, Denver, a high-octane offense, 109 points. I think And, a closer battle, I think if it comes down to executing in a close game, I'm going to lean toward Coach Spo and those guys. They just got to, bring it on offense. I think that's where they've struggled in the 2 losses that they've had with, scoring on the offensive end. And Gabe Vincent being out last in game 3, with foul trouble, I think that ultimately hurt their offense.
No doubt. I also wonder if Jimmy's impact has got to be on Murray defensively. Like, that's another element of this for sure. All right, it's the Hoffman Show. We're on the Team 980, always live as well on the free Odyssey app. When we get back, real things, real people said into real microphones. We got some doozies.
Here's
the Hoffman Show, wrapping up here on the Team 980. We didn't really get the chorus there, Anthony, which I feel like is the tradition. What are you doing? You mixing it up?
I did switch it up. I just wanted to hear the other lyrics in the song.
Oh,
I
okay.
haven't heard them in a while.
All right. Fair enough. We'll get back to it. Well, I guess not. I won't be here on next Friday. So whoever's in next Friday, they get to get hit with the Rebecca Black. But it is Friday. It is the end of the show. And whether it was Friday or not, the end of the show means it is time for Real Things Real People Said into real microphones.
Real things.
We're not going to be sucked this year.
Real people.
5 and 11, not very good.
Said into real microphones.
You know, the culture is actually damn good.
Apparently the culture's all right so far through a few practices for the Jets. Aaron Rodgers said when he got there, he was going to make Zach Wilson's life a living hell. So how's that going, Zach Wilson?
Handle that, and what have you seen from his approach?
Yeah, he's been incredible. You know, he hasn't made my life hell every day.
Oh, okay. Aaron Rodgers is a liar.
Keeping receipts, man.
Yeah. Zach Wilson's interesting dude. There's a lot of Googling you can do on Zach Wilson.
Yep.
It's, had an interesting young life. Some of these young athletes, man, thought they'd be savvier on the internet, thought they'd be savvier individuals, but at the end of the day, they're people, and some people aren't savvy.
Yep.
I think I stayed safe in my commentary there.
You did.
If you know, you know. Andy Reid and the Chiefs were at the White House earlier this week. There was a really funny clip that went around. It wouldn't have really worked on the radio, but Travis Kelce went to go say something in the microphone, and Patrick Mahomes just said nah and grabbed him, and there was a lot of laughter, but it was more of a visual clip than a funny audio clip. There was no thing said into a real microphone. Andy Reid did say this though on the White House spread:
a French toast, grilled cheese, and ham sandwich that they sprinkled a little bit of powdered sugar on. I mean, it was phenomenal. The guys were, and there was abundance of this, and then they had chicken fingers, exotic chicken fingers to boot. And then maybe the best part was they had, which I hadn't seen before, but little bite-sized squares of the heart of the watermelon.
Wow. Sounds great. Anthony, this local restaurant, the White House, should we go?
Exotic chicken fingers. I'm dying to know what those are.
Me too. Like, what is it? Do they just like have some seasoning on them?
Are they big? Are they small? Like,
yeah. I mean, a French toast. I'm not sure exactly what sandwich. There's a name for it. The French toast and ham, and I thought he was talking about a croque madame, but that's a different sandwich.
That's French.
Yeah.
Sure.
It is a very fancy ham sandwich, but it's not on the French toast with the powdered sugar. I'd have to look up and see what that one's called. But yeah, exotic chicken fingers, and also I guess Andy Reid has never had cutouts of
watermelon.
Of watermelon. I mean, not that I have, but like I understand how it works. I will say, Rachel found this reel earlier this week of a mom who like does really fun snacks for her kids, and she had like a crinkle cutter, like you use for crinkle cut fries, and she cut like crinkle watermelon fries essentially, and then made like a strawberry yogurt dip. I was like, that is a genius summer snack.
Very unique, actually.
It, like super fun for kids, but also delicious. I want that. Also, there are some things that are just not meant to be understood. The shape of certain French fries is one of them. Crinkle cut fries, like,
yeah.
Well, how do they do that? I guess now I know because I've seen the crinkle cutter. I've watched multiple videos on YouTube on how they make waffle fries. Still don't get it.
Man, waffle fries.
So good. But how do they make a potato into a waffle shape?
It's a great question.
Someone's like, you idiot. They do this. I've watched the videos. I do not understand. It's just some things in life, Anthony, are meant to be mysteries.
Pretty much.
Do we have time for the Mike McDaniel bite?
We literally just ran out of time because it's 38 seconds and we have about 30 seconds.
I see. All All right, so I'll tell you the plan for next week instead. I'm in Monday, Tuesday. On Monday, I do believe we're going to have Glenn Consor on as we start our NBA draft prep. Obviously, Tuesday got the OTA, so we'll see who shows up and who doesn't for that and how everybody does. Probably a chance to look at the young guys. Take Command available now, so make sure you're subscribed to that. Until then, though, have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday.
Daniel Snyder has a...